Yes, hi, my name is Key Lee. I'm new to the commission process. I've never really been to any part of this, but unfortunately, I'm not new to the permit process. 5 years ago in the city of Portland, I ended up having a heart attack, not understanding the process, just like everybody else, just kind of reacting to decisions that are made. I think it's clear to everybody that something got missed because this conversation should have happened at the first planning meeting and throughout. And then on that day that I showed up, I was surprised not to see anybody. Nobody was notified. I was the only person here. I didn't even know what I was talking about at that time. And then once I started looking at the regulations, like, wait a minute, we're supposed to be part of this process prior to an adoption. And then there was an emergency thing added to that. And I think one of the commissioners asked about that. Well, that's supposed to be for health and for the health or the safety of the people. It wasn't meant to, like they said, because everybody was concerned. But if everybody was concerned, how come nobody was notified? That was part of what was supposed to be done for that adoption, and either got missed or was purposely done to keep us away from being able to sit there and finish our development. That's called retroactive application to a new zoning. We were all in development for a food cart pod, not a 3-cart deal. And unfortunately, they held us in limbo while they secretly put together a new adoption. And now we're all supposed to be held to it, and we're having this conversation retroactively, not when we were supposed to have this conversation.
Declaring this as an emergency.
There are no emergencies in planning.
The emergency clause was not an.
Whoa. Here I come.
Was not an. It's a tool that we have to be able to say we would like to start the adoption of the code sooner than waiting the 30 days.
Question. So going back to the member probably know that prior to meeting we send staff questions and it's published. The answer is published in the meeting packet. So I just want to go back to revisit the question about declaring this as an emergency. Can you just? I read your answer, but can you just give us a little bit more of what will happen? What's the worst case scenario if this is not effective immediately? And instead of usually effective 30 days, right? If there's no emergency clause. So why does 30 days so important in this situation?
For us, so I want to recognize the sort of truism that there are no emergencies in planning, and I think in my time here we've not brought any land use ordinance before the council as an emergency. However, given the gaps and the inadequacies in our code to address proposals that are before us now from entrepreneurs, you've heard from some tonight in the public comment part of the agenda. We recognize the time value of money, and we recognize that we want to support as much as possible our entrepreneurs locally and to provide standards that could allow them to get approval and begin operating as soon as possible. So it's less about addressing an emergency public health and safety measure than it is about opening up that opportunity as soon as possible. Though I will note that one of the gaps in the code right now is provisions regulating the management of fats, oils, and grease. That is a public health emergency because it does have an immediate impact on the city's infrastructure. So we would want to address that as soon as possible.
The emergency clause was not an. It's a tool that we have to be able to say we would like to start the adoption of the code sooner than waiting the 30 days. And part of the reason we did that was because at the time our process and the way that Skylar had explained it is perfect, which is if you decide you're going to submit in an application right now, we would be compelled to have you meet all the requirements that are available right then and there. So if we did not have a food cart application process, so what that meant is that if you submitted an application January 27th, then we would have had to run you through basically a larger and more extensive application process. It's our development review application process. That meant that we would need things like, we would potentially need to have you look at getting a transportation analysis. It might have required you to go and, I'm trying to think of other applications off the fly, but there are multiple other requirements with our larger applications. And again, brick and mortar is a good example where if you're going to build something more substantial, we're going to require you to do more studies and evaluations. We were trying to set the application process available as effective the date of it. So the emergency component of it was just a matter of saying, we think we should have a process that was clearer for folks to be able to submit their applications in, because we were getting applications in for it. And what we were doing during the process was have them go through what's known as a pre-application conference. So you had to come into a meeting first just to talk about your application, and then you would have to go through another application. So instead of doing all that, we said, why don't we create a food cart process that would allow you to just submit that application in and address specifically the standards of food carts, instead of having to address the issue, larger issues that we normally would have with larger developments. So that was why it was an emergency clause. It was not changing anything when it came to what we would review. It made it clearer because as applicants were coming in and looking at food cart applications, we were asking the same questions. How is your spacing between your carts? Is your cart fully on a paved surface? How are you planning to connect into your fats? How are your fats, oils, and grease? Those questions were still being asked. The difference was it wasn't very clear. And so we said, let's make sure the standards are clear. Here are what you need to specifically know. It did not mean that on January 28th, we weren't requiring that. We were having those conversations. What are you going to do if you decided to put a canopy or awning? Do you have a bathroom? Those questions were still being asked. The only difference is we didn't have clear direction for food cart vendors who are coming in, because they're like, well, what do we need to know? And so hopefully, is that